Right, well, let's get back to what I started in September, shall we? I had 6 films out of 12 left to talk about as part of the B-Movie Hall of Fame game over on themovieforums.com, and once again, these'll pretty much be my first reaction gut instinct reviews with nothing too under the hood going on. So without further ado, let's get cracking. Cherry 2000 is a self-aware, dark comedy, semi-sci-fi adventure movie, and I'm really honestly struggling to find a suitable comparison to draw to this film. I could say that it's one part Borderlands meets one part She meets one part Total Recall, but I don't really feel like that would be doing this the justice that it deserves, really. That's because this is a damn fun little watch, and a generally fantastic film to settle into. What I most enjoyed about it is the fact that you can enjoy this movie on 2 levels. You can accept it on face value as a neat little action-adventure movie set in the far-off future of 2017, where fembots are rife and one man's emotional connection to his pre-programmed partner will lead to a massive adventure that will lead him to the wild wastelands, armed with only the help of the absolutely stunning Melanie Griffith as E. Johnson, a human gun for hire with a bit of wild flair. Or you can go highbrow and use the film as an opportunity to explore the intricacies of human social interaction and how people form emotional connections and what exactly constitutes humanity. Johnson in this believes that these are merely sex bots, though she may be speaking with a bit of a bias as she does have a bit of a thing for our main protagonist. But we do see people in this film engaging with these robots as if they were much-loved wives, partners, and lovers. I love the dual layers of engagement here, and it was really nice to be able to pay attention to both. Apart from that, we have some very colourful cinematography and direction that really makes the whole thing pop, a great little soundtrack that had me bobbing along, oodles of hidden sexual imagery. Seriously, this is one of the few movies where I can legitimately play Spot the Vagina, and some great set design and construction. It looks great, the script is brilliantly dark in its comedy and tone, it's similar to Total Recall or Demolition Man, and you'll be roughly in the right mindset for what you're getting into here. The performances are good, solid, and a little bit self-aware. Other than a couple of slightly duff deliveries here and there, the whole thing was just a riot to sit through. In many ways, it's the perfect cult movie. It promises a lot and delivers pretty much most of it. By the end credits, I wanted to see more of the director's work, which could only be a good thing. So yeah, this movie's absolutely awesome. Go and check it out as soon as you can. I was very hesitant about sitting down to this movie. It unites 2 things that genuinely daunt me as a critic. An irrational dislike of sword and sorcery films, and a very rational dislike of B-movies or bad movies with a run time that's much longer than they should or need to be. While I can overcome the former of these issues, if I can sit through Let's Ruin Dad's Day, I can sit through anything, the latter is something that I can become quite irascible on. Regular viewers will know that I don't take too kindly to films that outstay their welcome, and clocking in at 1 hour and 58 minutes, I audibly groaned and held my nose as I hit play on this one. But you know what? It's not awful. This film is goofy and charming and downright silly in places. I don't think it totally won me over, but it was entertaining enough that when the credits ran, I looked at the clock and went, wow, that flew by. The premise is fairly simple. An evil cult believes that child sacrifices will please the gods, so they attempt to steal the head of the tribe's unborn son, brand him with the mark of the gods, and sacrifice him in appeasement. This doesn't quite go to plan, and the baby, rather than being killed, is instead rescued by a local villager who teaches him the way of the warrior. A few years pass and it's revealed that the Mark of the Gods has allowed the young man at this point to communicate in some way with the animals. When the evil cult return to take out most of our hero's village, he swears vengeance on them and sets about picking up a few animal and human friends along the way to take out the cult once and for all. There are some very quirky and fun little moments in this. The pair of ferrets who have excellent stealing skills are funny and entertaining, as is the Black Panther. The villain of the piece was entertaining and had a pantomime charm about him. In fact, the only grumble that I have really is that there's a single scene in this where our hero comes across as a bit pervy. And I also had issues remembering everyone's names through all of this. In part because there's so many characters, and in part because they just don't really mention any names all that much. The direction's pretty much standard, as is the cine. In all honesty, this is just kind of a middle-of-the-road movie for me. Having seen a fair few films of this ilk, She, Wizards of the Lost Kingdom, Deathstalker, etc., I kind of ranked it a bit low in terms of the genre, but overall it's not a bad film. It was, however, one that I feel could have benefited from being a bit tighter though, and maybe a little bit more hammy as well. Not one I'd probably sink into again anytime soon, but by no means one to avoid. It's the kind of film meh was invented for, in my opinion. This was one of those I gotta watch this movie sometime kind of films. I remember first hearing about it back in my early teens and just thinking, geez, that sounds awful, as I dived completely unironically into VHS copies of Nightmare on Elm Street 5. And now in hindsight realise the idiotic mindset of my thinking back then. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is barely a movie. In fact, I don't really know what the hell it is, but I can tell you that it's bloody good fun. Up until the turn of the century, I can honestly say that I don't think there's anything quite like this movie out there. The acting and some of the plot elements reminded me a little bit of The Stuff, until I remembered that The Stuff came out a full 8 years after this film was made. Honestly, I was totally lost on the plot with this one. Killer Tomatoes just start popping up and picking people off, and an undercover officer is tasked with getting to the bottom of it all. Meanwhile, there's an undercover journalist who's also put on the case, and then a paratrooper turns up who may or may not think it's World War II, who's somehow dragged into the proceedings, and then there's a Chinese scientist who's dubbed over with a heavy American accent who has a half-human, half-robot man-machine, and the film's constantly interrupted with adverts for furniture that may or may not even be real, and to be honest, I don't even know what's going on anymore. As confusing and bizarre as this movie is, I actually found it pretty refreshing and very entertaining. There's a very distinct surreal comedic streak running through this, and it's nice to see a film fully embrace open anarchy unapologetically. I genuinely had no idea what was going to happen next in this film. And while I think this could have maybe benefited from a little bit more structure, by the same merit, I can't honestly say that I'm entirely in favour of its free-flow nature as it stands. I really enjoyed this one, and I can't honestly say much more about it without spoiling it. Oh, also, this film has its own theme tune, and it's ridiculously catchy, like ludicrously so. I spent the best part of the day after I saw this humming it out loud, and it literally wouldn't leave me alone. Oh, this one was good. Right from the off, I immediately knew I was going to be pretty much up for the kind of thing that this movie was throwing down. You see, this film has an interesting and simple gimmick. One of the characters in this film is a werewolf, and you have to decide which of the characters is the guilty party. The film even gives you a 30-second break to discuss with others in the theatre or in your front room via something called a wolf break. When the film gives you a format like this, it makes you approach the film viewing process completely differently. Had I been watching from the perspective that this was just a monster movie, I'd have probably been pretty disappointed. However, because they put this format in place, I was absolutely hooked on this one, and I thought I'd figured out who'd done it pretty much within the first 20 minutes. Until the film punched me in the face and called me an idiot because I was wrong. Calvin Lockhart steals the show as Tom Newcliffe, the owner of a residency out in the countryside that's been built with one specific purpose: to gather a group of potential werewolves together in order to root out the actual culprit. And while Calvin is fantastic and brilliant and the perfect kind of protagonist for this, I did feel rather shortchanged that this movie has Peter Cushing and Charles Gray in it, and pretty much has them sidelined for most of, if not all of, the movie. Still, Lockhart manages to keep the tone of the film perfectly on track as a man fascinated by something supernatural to the point of near madness, and his obsession may cost him more than just his mind. This is far from a perfect film. There are a few structural issues. The first 10 minutes or so are entirely given up to a false chase sequence, which was ultimately quite pointless and could have been heavily edited down. And there are moments that are aimed at being fake-out moments that in reality just seem like time-killing exercises. The scene and direction's pretty nice, if not a little generic for the era, and the soundtrack is fantastically out of place. I'm not kidding, this soundtrack realistically shouldn't work with this film, and yet I found myself captivated by just how unusually fitting funk soul was in fitting in with 50s and 60s style whodunit murder mysteries. It reminded me of a much less stylised, much less gorier giallo film for all intents and purposes. This isn't a perfect film by any stretch of the imagination, but if the brief is find the best B-movie, then this is arguably the strongest contender for an archetypical B-movie. At least since I started this game it has been. It's delightfully good fun, with a few twists and turns I genuinely didn't expect, and a payoff that, while a touch underwhelming, was more than worth the price of admission. I'm going to be both crude and vulgar in my summary of this film. This movie needs to go and have a massive wank. I mean a good and proper one. It needs to take some time and sort its pent-up sexual frustrations out, preferably somewhere private and away from public view. The editor is a giallo-cum-slasher-inspired horror thriller following a film editor who's working on a giallo-cum-slasher horror thriller when some of the cast start to mysteriously end up bumped off. When the editor received an additional reel in amongst his day's editing that shows one of the victims being killed, he begins to become mildly paranoid about who the killer could be. And as the film progresses and the bodies begin to build up, it quickly becomes apparent that not all is as it seems. This film reminded me quite heavily of Francesca, another mock giallo movie that I actually reviewed on my channel a short while ago. I'm really not a fan generally of films like this. They often end up either being too rigid to the archetypical formula and end up boring, or they latch on too much to the campy elements of giallo cinema and end up becoming almost a parody of the genre that they were supposed to be homaging. This film falls into the latter of the two styles, with little comedic nods and winks to films like Suspiria, Deep Red and The Beyond, and as a result, quite unfortunately, it's pretty unwatchable to me. It's too proud of its ability to name-check and reference-drop other films, and as a result, it just left me wanting to sit down and watch a decent Argento or Fulci movie. There's way too much eroticism in this. Wow, I never thought I'd find myself saying that. With beautiful women being thrust in and out of the camera pretty much every 10 minutes or so, and gratuitous nudity and sex scenes pretty much destroying any goodwill I could give to the more well-minded sequences. It made this movie just seem a bit sleazy, and the costumes all look like a parody of the kind of clothes people who were in giallo movies in the 70s would wear. The dialogue feels uncomfortable because it's trying to ape English redubs of Italian dialogue, and because of that, it's been scripted that way purposely, and it just doesn't flow as strangely and unusually as it would had it been translated. And I need to point out that artificial cigar burns will not win you any points in my favour, Mr. Director, no matter how much you want me to like this movie. The scene and direction's pretty fine, but ultimately this really wasn't my cup of tea. It just felt tonally aloof, like the film's soul wasn't there. Though I will compliment the soundtrack. There's some pretty sweet tunes buried in this one. Overall, a sad pass from me. And rounding off this 2-month odyssey into the wild and wonderful world of B-movies, we have Night of the Creeps. A movie I waited 12 months to see because I found out Eureka were going to be releasing a fully restored copy of this in October on shiny shiny disc, and so I hung tight out of high hopes for it. The film follows two nerds, used here in the loosest manner possible. Seriously, these are the least nerdy nerds I've seen in a movie with nerds in, as they try their best to score with the girls of their dreams. The opening of the film is set in the 1950s and establishes that an alien parasite has crash-landed on Earth and made a host in a college freshman who's now cryogenically stored in the basement of our hero's campus. When our nerdy ne'er-do-wells stumble on the cryopod, they accidentally thaw out the 50s freshman, who's revealed to be fully zombified. From there, parasitic slugs slowly start to take over, turning half the campus freshmen into the undead, and only our heroes and a sorority girl and a tipsy Tom Atkins can get to the bottom of how to stop them and save the day in time for prom. I'd so wanted this film to be good, I really, really did. I thought I'd save the best till last, and sadly I was underwhelmed by this one. I'll get the good out of the way right away. Tom Atkins is amazing, absolutely astoundingly good. He's the main reason to go and watch this movie. Every minute he's on screen, he's quipping, shooting, and having a ball. I loved him in Halloween 3, I loved him in Escape from New York, and I love him in this. The scene and direction's delightful, and they really capture that campy 50s B-movie vibe perfectly in the opening scene. It's nice to see practical effects get such an effective usage as well. Seriously, there's some lovely little bits in this, and some of the kill shots are just fantastically handled. It's a true blue B-movie in every sense of the word in that sense. However, I do have some serious problems with the script structure. This is a slow-burning film, and considering it's 89 minutes long, it easily felt like a 2-hour feature. The first two acts painfully crawl through exposition, character setup, backstories, and establishing the alien zombies, before the third act delivers a much-needed kick up the arse that was visually impressive, well-written, and genuinely enjoyable to watch. And that's the problem. This film's third act really should have been the start of this movie's second act. They really should have done more with the campus under threat from zombies angle. But instead we get about 20 minutes into the second act, and all that's happened is a minor incident in a sorority house and a brief exchange in a toilet cubicle, and that's about it really. It would have been so much more interesting if Atkins had gone full badass in the second act and it had built on that through the second and third act to a grand payoff. But as it stands, it felt like a sluggish build to a payoff that just wasn't ultimately worth it. This to me felt like a great idea that just didn't have the budget to realise it. Honestly, for a similar and more bombastic experience, I'd recommend Return of the Living Dead. Though now I have a mental image of Return of the Living Dead starring Tom Atkins, which, oh lord, I'm gonna need to lie down. An okay movie if you can tolerate slow burners. It's a little bit... And that's your lot. I've reviewed all 12 and my nominations have been sent to Joel. Who'll be the top dog big winner? Well, I can't tell you just yet, but if you head over to the movie forums, you'll get to see the winner announced as soon as all the votes come in. Link is in the description. I'll also post my nominations in the description once the competition's over, and I'll link to my thoughts on why I've nominated each film the way I have in future as well. Honestly, I've really enjoyed doing this. I know there's a third one on the horizon sometime soon, and I'll definitely be keeping my eye out for that one. Till next time.